Hey, welcome back to another edition of Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
And obviously, we are coming to you through Zoom if you happen to be watching the video version of this. If you are listening, I'm hoping that you have good audio quality. I had to sneak to my room because I didn't have good bandwidth in other parts of the house. And I'm also hoping the dogs don't interrupt. So this is what happens when you're on COVID quarantine.
Yes. And I hope you get better.
Thank you. This is my last day of lockdown, so I'm looking forward to my return to the world. But you and I did not get a chance to record last week, and I had the opportunity to have my husband, Bob, step in, and he shared his story about his journey with some alcohol addiction and his journey of sobriety, and got some really good feedback on that episode, and was thankful that we got to share that story a little bit. But I definitely was eager to just reconnect with you. It feels like it's been several weeks since we've been face to face. So glad to have the opportunity again.
And it's good to be with you also.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about this concept of loving your neighbor as you love yourself. We've heard that as, ancient wisdom, biblical wisdom. It's in lots of ancient literature. But I was really meditating on that concept recently in the aspect of, can you love your neighbor if you're struggling to love yourself? And the way that you view yourself and the way that you care for yourself, does that have a direct correlation, a direct impact on how well you're able to love and care for others? And wanted to see your thoughts on that.
Well, I think I was going to say the obvious answer. I would say that in my experience, it's certainly an obvious answer that is yes. I have read many articles and books from people way smarter than myself that pretty much say it this way. If on a level of 1 to 10, how much do you love yourself? Okay. And let's say you're a 6 on a good day. Well, that's the maximum level that you could love somebody else. In other words, it's not only love your neighbor as yourself, it's you can only love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. In other words, if you don't love yourself, then you don't have the love to give, and you struggle with your own acceptance and your own grace towards yourself. How can you give that to others?
Mm. This is really something that I will be curious about because I don't have a fixed answer on this. On one hand, I feel like I could say, well, we've been made in such a way that we have capacity to give beyond ourselves. That even if we don't feel equipped, or even if we don't necessarily have, the gumption for something, that when rubber meets the road and somebody needs something from us, we're often able to generate that. But I absolutely hear the point and hear what you're saying about, if we are kind of our internal needs are depleted, if we don't feel like we are at capacity of self-love, and I want to be kind of careful with that phrase, how could we possibly love others? And so I really do feel like this is a curious topic. I've got some personal things I'm struggling through, but I want to point it back over to you just for some kind of initial feedback.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right that you can love others more than yourself temporarily.
Mm.
And I think when I made that bold statement, and I didn't mean for it to come across as an absolute, because nothing in life is an absolute.
Sure.
It's kind of a long term, over the course of time statement. It's not as a matter of fact, if I'm not feeling kind of down about myself, the first thing if I remember, because sometimes I just get into my own head, the first thing I do if I remember is to pick up the phone and call somebody else, or see if I can be of aid or help to someone else, whether it's a family member or somebody walking down the street or my neighbor pulling in their trash cans, because it always makes us feel better and lifts us up when we do something for someone else. So in that way, you might say, well, wait a minute, at that point, Gary, you are loving someone more than you're loving yourself. Yes, but long term, if you over time, it's very difficult to love others more than yourself, just because the same tools that you do for not being anxious and upset and worried and stressed out are things that go into your outside relationships as well. So there's at least a correlation,
Yeah.
if not absolute.
Yeah. So I think what I've been really struggling with, and I've shared this a few episodes now, that, I had a cancer diagnosis over the summer. I had a series of surgeries. I now have a very substantial bald spot right in the middle of my head. I have to either wear a partial wig, I have to wear a bandana, some sort of a head covering or a hat, because if I were to take it off, it's very obvious. It's I don't know, maybe the diameter of a Coke can, the bottom of a Coke can, on the top of my head, and it doesn't look like the hair is going to come back at all. And I've found myself struggling tremendously, even looking in the mirror and feeling like it's not myself. It's not, it's probably not going to change is the reality. And so how do I develop a love for myself again? I understand it's not all about appearance, never has been, but the way that you feel comfortable in your own skin has a huge role to play in how well you are in your comfort in interaction with others.
Your physical appearance, while it should not determine you and your own self-image, it has a huge influence on it. I mean, and nobody can tell you any different. I think it's silly to say, well, it shouldn't make any difference, so it won't. That's just a silly statement as far as I'm concerned. Our physical appearance does have an effect on our own self-image. We can argue that it shouldn't. We can argue how much it does, but it does.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that, unfortunately, there's a grief process.
Yeah.
It's not just for when you lose a loved one. It's when you lose some hair. It's
Yeah.
when you lose anything that's near and dear to you, and the intensity of same is how much that is near and dear to you, right? And so you're going to have to go through that same grief process that is well documented. So
Yeah.
it's going to be denial, it's going to be anger, it's going to be all those things. And then eventually you get to acceptance. And when acceptance occurs, and that who knows when that's going to happen, it could be a day, it could be a year, it could be a lifetime.
Yeah.
And no one can determine that journey but yourself, right? I mean, and everybody, we've all heard the adage that everybody grieves differently.
Mm-hmm.
And you shouldn't come at someone and tell them that they're not grieving properly or you're not grieving fast enough. It's absolutely true. And we've talked about that on previous podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
The way that we grieve and the way that we get through things is our own journey, and it's part of our own journey.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have talked on this podcast before about grief and trauma and micro traumas and macro traumas and how they kind of all weave their way in and out of our lives. Some people call them storms. Some people call them tests. Some people call them just bad, bad luck.
Yeah.
But the point is, life is all about how we deal with what happens to us,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we maintain an adequate self-image.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be perfect,
Yeah.
but an adequate self-image to be able to be useful to others and to our surroundings and to ourselves.
Yeah. And I would say not just useful to others, but truly loving others. And, I've found myself just thinking about this at length for the last several weeks because this has been my very real circumstance right now is I don't think this hair is coming back. How do I deal with things moving forward? How do I feel beautiful in my own skin? How do I have that love for myself so that I can actively engage in love for my husband, love for my children, look somebody in the eye, not feel a sense of shame or embarrassment and all the things that you have to deal with. And so I really have been thinking a lot about this. And, with all of the medical stuff has come the weight gain too. And then you can get fixated on, body size, body appearance, all of the things. And so this very much has been top of mind, literally and figuratively. And so I remember years ago, coming across a story of I believe it was a soldier that had an IUD explode and cause severe facial burns, and that process of going home disfigured. And how do you go home and reintegrate into family and into a setting when you have such a vastly different physical appearance? Like the core of who you are hasn't changed, but the outward has. And it's hard for, he was telling his story, how hard it was for him to, feel any sense of wholeness or completeness because of how much damage had been done and how drastically it impacted, the people around him. And so this is a fascinating topic to me. And I know that by the end of our 25 minutes, we're certainly not going to land on an answer, but I do think it's a curious question for us all to consider. Is there something about us, whether it be physical or otherwise, that is causing us not to love ourselves? And is that in turn really impacting the way that we have the capacity to love others?
And I think one of the curious questions there is, can I turn this around to my benefit? Can I turn this around to a positive in my own life, for my own self-worth and my own self-image, and those of those around us?
Yeah.
And we've all seen the folks who take the stage with a severe disability or a loss of a limb,
Yeah.
or they're not sighted. I just watched. I don't know how we got on this because it's one of the shows that I actually like, and sometimes brings me to tears. But America's Got Talent, and I think this year we were watching a highlight reel, but I think there was two folks who this year are performers, singers, and musicians that don't have their sight.
Mm.
And the way that they are an inspiration
Mm.
to the audience and to me as an observer and someone watching a show from thousands of miles away is hugely impactful.
Mm.
And I think that anything can be turned into an inspiration and a positive thing. I'm saying this thinking, yeah, but doesn't that just put more pressure on you to figure something out? And the longer it takes you, then what's wrong with you, and then it could lead to even worse thoughts, right?
Mm.
No, I'm just thinking about the average person who's listening to this, because
Yeah,
we all have our issues,
absolutely.
right? And just in various forms. Some of them are visible, some of them are invisible. And if we were all very honest, or we all walked around with a sign on us or a sandwich board that said, I have this issue, I have this issue, I have this issue, we'd realize pretty quickly that everybody has issues.
Yeah.
Everybody's on a journey. Everybody has these things that are going on in their lives. And I think that, people who have visible aspects of themselves that they've clearly overcome,
Mm-hmm.
it's an inspiration to everyone.
So interesting that you just painted that picture mentally for me, because I was at a conference last week, and there was a keynote speaker and he was addressing the room, and I found myself kind of zoning out. He was kind of given the same information that I've heard several times over, and probably 3 minutes before the end of his presentation, he mentions almost as an aside that in year, I don't know, 2017, 2018, I don't remember when it was, his son was killed. And I instantly found myself, my focus was completely rerouted to be like, I want to hear what this guy has to say. And I found myself reflecting on that. I thought, why was it a pain point that made me have a different perspective, a more definitive listening? I'm using the wrong words, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. Why did that pain point cause me to give him more credit somehow? And I think it's because, there is that genuineness that we want to see. Not that we want everyone to broadcast their pain all the time, but I think the people who have learned to do life and do it well, and as you said, have become an inspiration despite the pain, I think that is so powerful beyond what we give it credit for, but beyond what we vocalize. And so, yeah, if I get to a point where I can shout from the rooftops, hey guys, I had cancer, I've overcome, and I've got a giant bald spot, but let's do life joyfully. If I can get to that point, I want to be an inspiration to others. My pain point is not the pain point of losing a child by any means. I'm not equating the two, but there is something to be said for being genuine and not not hiding the fact that it is pain that brought us to a place of understanding and acceptance.
Helping people by being a positive influence in their lives and helping them to develop their own vision for their lives is, in my experience, much easier if you're vulnerable.
Mm.
Um, you know, Nobody wants to hear from someone who's perfect,
Right.
right? People want to hear from someone who have been through something, even if it's, especially if it's similar to their own experience. But even if it's not, even if it's identified by you, the listener, as an experience that is something that, holy crap, I've thought about that in my head, and I thought, what would I do? And yet here's this guy up on stage.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that your thought was, well, now he's worth listening to,
Mm.
because we all tend to be like that. It's ironic, or maybe that's the misuse of a word, but like Alanis Morissette, right? But we set such high expectations for ourselves, and we always, I using I statements, always put this mask on of, I'm valid to be in the room or in this conversation, and I need to prove to you that I am worthy to be in this conversation and have influence on you. When really, if you take the mask off,
Mm.
people have a tendency to listen to that, it's true with me.
Mm-hmm.
So why do I try to pretend like I need to prove something to someone and to be able to be in the conversation, when my reaction to others, my response to others when they are vulnerable, is one of, oh my goodness, I care about you, I'm with you, I'm in this with you now.
Yeah.
It's kind of a funny thought process to have, because I act one way which belies my own experience.
Yeah. I was looking at a form a day or two ago, and it said something about, it was a value statement of company that we value our employees coming with their whole selves. We
Mm-hmm.
want them to come with their whole selves. And as I think about this, it's easy for us to love the parts of ourselves that are high performing, right? Maybe you're great at accounting, maybe you're great at cooking, you're great at whatever, and you can love that aspect of yourself. But to really show up and to love your whole self is something altogether different. But it does include showing up with your pain, and not just for to purposes of being genuine, but I think, beyond what we might believe initially, it really is a point of connection for so many people. Because how easy is it for us to sit and judge someone? It's like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, they're rich, they're successful, they're whatever. But then when you hear, but they lost a child, all of the sudden it's like, oh, that person knows pain, and they may be rich and they may be successful and the leader of a big company, but there is a point at which I can connect because I know this guy knows what suffering is. And it is curious to me that coming forward with your whole self, that the authenticity of your whole self showing up somewhere really makes an impact in how you connect with others.
Well, and I think for me, I spend a lot of my time way too much than I want to, and I've become increasingly aware in my life, and I wish I could say that I'm completely over it, but I'm not. Probably on a daily basis. Is I tend to compare and compete with others,
Mm.
and rarely is that a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I guess if I'm playing a game of backgammon with a friend or something, but really, what's more important there am I there to win, or am I there to have social time with my friend? What's the goal? What's the purpose? If the purpose is to have positive impact on people's lives, then comparing ourselves to or competing with others generally is not the way to do it. When I compare myself to someone, and this may be one of the processes that was going on in your brain, this guy's up on stage trying to tell me something, and I'm not sure that, that he's going to tell me anything new. And I've heard this before, and and I'm comparing myself, and then all of a sudden, the loss of a child comes up. It's like, whoa.
Mm.
And you stop comparing and you stop competing, and you think, okay, now I can get rid of that stuff and I can just be in the moment, and let's hear the nugget that he has to say to me that I want to hear now.
Yeah. I don't know that I had that conscientious thought, but I'm sure that was probably in there somewhere. And, for anyone who's walked through intense grief and how they've had to process it, there is a part of yourself that you don't like as you walk through that grief, right? Whether you turn to, something to fill that hole, substance, food, people, distractions, whatever, there becomes to be this association, a very negative association with that grief that you latch onto to manage that time. And so, that concept around your pain is part of who you are, it's part of your whole authentic self, but learning to accept it getting to that point where you allow yourself to become healed and whole. And then, not that you love the pain, but you love that you are a full human being with the experiences of humanity, that you are equipped to offer comfort to someone else based on your own experiences. There is something beautiful in that, but I think we often don't consider it when we're walking through that journey.
And don't tell me as I'm walking through the journey that this is going to be good for me long term, because
Right.
it doesn't feel like that.
Right.
At some point, we will be able to look back and not only realize that we have that we're a better person for it and that we've benefited, but that we can then go and help others. And you know, we don't we stop putting in the past and denying what happened. We embrace it and figure out how to use it to help others and bring that comfort and that strength and that encouragement that only you can give, having walked through that. And that's the kind of stuff that I think is definitely hard to hear
Mm-hmm.
while you're walking through it, but is almost universally true when you talk to people who've been through major trauma and grief processes in their life.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, I don't think that's our place to say, this is going to be beautiful one day. Just wait till you can be an encouragement to someone. Not the time, not the place. But I
So,
think everyone has to come into that revelation on their own about, as they've walked through the healing journey, that they do have, some authority to speak on a position of, I've been through this. I've received some healing on this, and I have accepted it's part of who I am, and I'm going to choose to love myself and love you in the capacity that only I can, because I can understand.
and I think that that's another thing that is really important about coming out of that, and that is just speaking from our own experience
Yeah.
and not trying to tell anybody else how to get through what they're going through. Which I appreciate your parenthetical statement there of that's not our purpose here.
Mm-hmm.
Our purpose here is to talk about how we have walked through things, how we've seen other people walk through things, not to be prescriptive, but descriptive of a process that can occur and can be good in order to give hope,
Yeah.
because that's really what we all need is that hope, especially when we're in it.
Yeah.
You know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a time when this could possibly be used for good.
Mm-hmm.
There is a time that I can say, I've gone through this journey and I am stronger, or I can help others more, or whatever. I have to have that hope.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, because I don't want to live in the pain when my wife died suddenly, I don't want to be in that pain forever. It
Right.
was terrible. Now, don't come to me in the middle of that and tell me that everything's going to be fine and you're going to be a better person for it. I didn't want to hear it.
Of course.
It's now 3 years later, and I'm just now figuring out how to hear that. And it has really, really, really been tough. But that's the kind of stuff that, again, if we can give encouragement and hope to people, then then that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe just one curious question to close us out then. If you find yourself, and I'm speaking you to whoever's listening or watching, that there's an area of your life that you're finding really hard to love, just to begin with that place of awareness, right? Like, I am aware that my physical issues are causing me not to love myself, and it is impacting how well I can love, those closest to me. And so there's an awareness, and I know this will be a journey. And at some point, I will be able to look back and speak to it with a different perspective. But I'm aware and I know that there needs to be some continued healing. And so I guess that curious question is there an area where you're struggling to love yourself? And as you have that awareness, are you willing to pursue a degree of getting some help and healing so that there can be a shift in perspective down the road?
And to have hope
Yes.
that some process exists that can get you to not necessarily the perfect place, never the perfect place, but a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gary, I miss seeing you face to face, but we'll leave that for a more healthy season. And I know you've got some travel coming up, so we may be doing a few back to back Zoom episodes.
Well, and I appreciate seeing you also, and you just get better soon and get back out in the world, and hopefully we'll see each other soon.
Absolutely. Well, have a wonderful next set of conferences, and we'll catch up soon. And thanks all for listening or watching, and always appreciate your feedback. Curiosity.notjudgment.com is the website, and you can start there for points of contact if you want to reach out. So be blessed and stay curious.
Take good care.